Okay, in this video I'm going to go through 5 examples from section 8.3, which is on page 466, and maybe these examples will help a little bit with some of the last few questions. I'll just show you some of the ways I would think about the problem and how I would simplify it, maybe as easy as I can. On this one, what I would do is I would rewrite the numerator as y times y, and the denominator is y times y times y. Not even touching this exponent. And then I would take my 1's out. Okay, that's 1, and that's 1. Okay, so now what I have is 1 over y, all raised to the negative 2 power. So I'll go up here. Okay, since I have a negative exponent right here, okay, what I would do is I would change my fraction, or change my base, to be the reciprocal, which would be y over 1, and then I would change my exponent to a positive 2. And so I would have y to the second, and that would be my answer. So I simplify the base to be 1 over y first, and then take it to the negative 2 power. Okay, on this next one, very similar, I would simplify my numerator and denominator, write out 2, and then my x's and my y's. And on the bottom I have 3 times x times y, and all of it to the 3rd power. And so just take my 1's out, there's a 1, and there's a 1. And so that leaves me on the top, it's going to be 2x squared y to the 3rd over 3. And all of that is to the 3rd power. And so now, since my base, 2x squared y to the 3rd, over 3, and that's all the 3rd power, I would have 3 of these bases, right, all multiplied together, which one way you can do that is to take 2 to the 3rd, then x squared to the 3rd, then y to the 3rd, to the 3rd, and that would all be over 3 to the 3rd. I have a lot of room there, but 2 to the 3rd is 8. X squared to the 3rd, I'd have 3x squared, x squared times x squared times x squared would be x to the 6th. And then I'd have y to the 3rd to the 3rd. I'd have 3 groups of y to the 3rd, y to the 3rd times y to the 3rd times y to the 3rd. That would be y to the 9th. And on the bottom, you'd have 3 to the 3rd. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. And so I'd have 8x to the 6th, y to the 9th, all over 27. Okay, on this next one, you can do a similar thing. I'll do it 2 different ways. One way where you would have 4 and then simplify and so expand everything out and then take out your 1's. Okay, that's a 1, that's a 1. 4 becomes 2 times 2, and so that's a 1. Over here, that's a 1. And so on this first fraction, my numerator would be 2x squared y squared over 1. And then on the top, you have 5xy over 2. And then when you multiply them, 2 times 5 is 10, x squared times x is x to the 3rd, y squared times y is y to the 3rd, all over 2. Now I can still simplify. This becomes 5 times 2, and that becomes 1. And so you have 5 x to the 3rd, y to the 3rd. And now second way to have done this problem. And so one way is to do it that way. The other way would have been to multiply across, so that you would have 20 x to the fourth, y to the fifth, all over 4x, y squared. And so now when you go through, when you do it, you'd have 5 times 4 times the different x's and the y's, all over 4 times x times the 2 y's. Take all of your 1's out of that. Okay, there's obviously a 1, there's a 1, and there's a 1, and there's a 1. And then what's left would be the same thing that you had here. 5x to the third, y to the third, all over 1, which becomes 5x to the third, y to the third. So you can see I did it two ways. One way I expanded out, simplified each fractions, and then multiplied, simplified my result. The other way I multiplied across first, then simplified. Okay, the end result, same thing, both places. Hey, on this one, hey, I'm going to simplify things a little bit first. Here's the negative exponent right there. Hey, that negative exponent means that this y base is going to come down here. So one thing that I would do is make it 16x to the fifth, and the y to the negative eighth is going to go in the denominator. I'll have x to the seventh, and when you put that, multiply it by y to the fourth on the denominator, you would have y to the 12th. And then you still have this other fraction, which is x to the third, y squared, over 8xy, and all that to the fourth power. Now, simplifying the left fraction, now you've got x to the fifth on top and x to the seventh on the bottom. Okay, so when you have those exponents there, and I'm going to lose my x's on top. I'm going to have x squared on the bottom, y to the 12th. And over here on the other side, if I simplify a little bit, remember this is to the first power and that's to the first power. So you have those are the same base and those are the same base. So when I write this, I'm going to have an 8 on the bottom. X to the third over x to the first is going to leave me x squared on top. X squared on top, y squared over y to the first is going to leave me a y on the top. And then that's all to the fourth power. So I can leave this here. Now raise everything to the fourth power. X to the second, raised to the fourth would be x to the eighth. Y to the first, remember, to the fourth would be y to the fourth. And then on the bottom, you're going to have 8 to the fourth. Now, I'm not going to figure out what 8 to the fourth is. I'll show you why in a second. Now I'll just multiply numerators across, and you end up with 16 x to the 8th, y to the fourth, over, I have this 8 to the fourth, and then I have x squared, y to the 12th. Again, now I have like bases, my x's. I've got an 8 there and 2, and here I've got a 4 on top and a 12. I also have 16, which can become, oops, 16 can become 8 times 2. And then 8 to the fourth, remember, is 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. Well, that's 1 right there. And then I can change my 8 to be 2 times 4. And then this is 1. And so now if I start simplifying things, my x's, I have 8 x factors on the top and 2 x factors on the bottom. That's going to be x to the 6th on the top. And I've got 8 times 8 times 4, which is 256. That's all in the denominator. And then I had 4 y factors on top and 12 y factors on the bottom. That's 8 y factors that remain on the bottom. And so I have x to the 6th over 256 y to the 8th. So on that one, again, I'm still kind of simplifying each fraction and multiplying across. I started off by moving the denominator or the exponent that was -8 rather into the denominator. I found my like bases, my x's, my y's, simplified. All right, now the last one, this one's got quite a few negative exponents. Negative exponent here, negative exponent there, negative exponent there. Now this whole base, this whole thing here is the base. So that's all going to end up moving. Right? First thing I would do is I would take the base that has the negative exponent. So here I have an x that goes with that negative exponent. 5 stays, the y squared stays. I'm going to have the x to the 5th here. The x to the -3 is going to go to the bottom. The y to the -1 is going to come up to the top. So it's just moving my negative bases, or negative exponents rather. Move the base to the top, move the base to the bottom. And over here, I have to take the entire base, all of that, 2x y to the 3rd. That's all going to go to the bottom. So I'm going to leave a 1. I'm going to have the x times y. And then I'm going to have the whole thing, 2xy to the 3rd, all to +2. And now it's just a matter of me simplifying, then multiplying across. This would be 5y to the 3rd. This would be x to the 8th. Over here is going to be 1 over. And I'm going to have x times y. Then I have 2xy to the 3rds. So 2 squared is 4. X to the 1st squared would be x squared. And x to the 3rd squared, y to the 3rd squared would be y to the 6th. And so if I simplify that on the right, I'm putting in extra steps here that I maybe wouldn't put in. 1 over with the 4 here, and I have x to the 3rd, y to the 7th. And now it's time to simplify everything. If I multiply across, I would have 5y to the 3rd, and then x to the 8th, the 4, and I would have x to the 8th times x to the 3rd would be x to the 11th, y to the 7th. And now all I have to simplify is the y to the 3rd over y to the 7th. My y factors are going to disappear on the top. Oops. And I would have 4 x to the 11th. And since I had 7 y factors on the bottom, I'll be left with 4 when I factor out all my 1s. And that would be my answer. So hopefully some of these examples will help you to do other problems on your homework.